You're listening to CinePunked. This episode, If I Die Before I Wake. I'm your host, Robert J. E. Simpson. Sitting with me today, as ever, are Dr. Rachel Kelly.
Hello.
And Mr. Ben Simpson.
Hello.
So today on the show, we are looking at the 1947 Orson Welles film, The Lady From Shanghai, starring Orson Welles and Rita Hayworth. And it's based on the 1938 Raymond Sherwin King novel, If I Die Before I Wake, which has now given our episode its title. See what we did there? Very clever. This is, do you know what? Let's start with the really, really obvious thing. My relationship with this film has changed an awful lot over the last 20 years, I guess, of watching it. I didn't like it at the start. I'm much better with it now. But my big sticking problem, well, you can probably guess, was the accent.
Yes, the accent.
Orson Welles' is Irish with an O accent.
Bigara.
Ah, jeez.
When I start out to make a fool of myself, there's very little can stop me. If I'd known where it would end, I'd have never let anything start. If I had been in my right mind, that is.
Yeah, so the guy lived in Ireland for a while. He lived in Ireland.
No, let's take it further than this. According to the mythology, and when you're talking about Orson Welles, I think it's always a fairly safe assumption.
Yeah,
because
he was a dreadful embellisher in terms of his life.
Raconteur, a storyteller.
If Orson Welles tells you a story about something, you're going to double check it with at least 3 people before you take it with anything more than a grain of salt.
But Orson Welles tells the story that when he came here to Ireland when he was 15, 16 years of age, he arrived in Dublin and managed to convince a couple of very reasonably prominent theatre producers at the time to take him under their arm and employ him permanently. He let on he was actually more important in the States than he was at that time. But I love the fact that, he's such a shining talent that they took him under their wing instantaneously. They lived here for so long, and his Irish accent is appalling.
It's like he's never even heard an Irish person speak, except somebody who was from Hollywood doing an Irish accent. Badly.
That'd be Hollywood, California, not Hollywood County Down.
Yes.
Although
that's
their
a
Irish
totally different accent.
Also a terribly bad Irish accent, let's be honest.
Oi.
Ben, how do you feel about Orson Welles' Irish accent? Moich.
It was a bit keek now. That's the thing, like anytime you hear somebody doing an Irish or Northern Irish accent, obviously we are from
Damn loyal, so we
that
are.
beautiful part of the world, where everything's green and that. Anytime you hear somebody doing an accent from here or down south across the border, you're like, you shouldn't really be doing that. You should probably get somebody from Ireland, that part of the world.
Is this a problem that... Is this something that we should maybe be more of with actors anyway? That perhaps we should. I mean, actors use accents all the time. That's not unusual.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my first thing about this is I understand that the film is being made more or less on the back of Orson Welles, pushing it through, and the fact he's able to get Rita Hayworth in, and it's not so much a passion project, but a project that he is on board with and is a driving force behind. Fine, okay, so maybe it has to be Orson Welles. He brings a certain particular something to the film as an actor. He brings a certain particular something to the film as a director. Why did they keep the character Irish? It makes no odds to the plot whatsoever if that character ceases to be Irish. Is any huge fans of the book going to be coming and beating down the doors of the cinema going, I demand Michael O'Hara's name be changed back to whatever, how dare you make that not Irish? I mean, just let the character not be Irish. It makes no difference.
Well, he could have had that name and been ancestor of
Yeah, could be second generation Irish immigrants. You know, it's no reason why that character had to remain an Irish character in the face of the absolute inability of Orson Welles to pull off a convincing Irish accent. I suspect it's more to do with the fact that Orson Welles had lived in Ireland. He went, God, yeah, I can definitely do an Irish accent. How very dare you say that I can't? And yeah, I mean, if at that point in Orson Welles' career, he's still the enfant terrible to a certain extent. He's sort of diminishing returns, but Hollywood hasn't quite given up on him yet. So maybe he did have the cachet to just go, screw you guys, I'm being Irish and you can't stop me.
I just don't know, quite honestly. I mean, I guess... does his nationality code the character in some way, shape or form that you then look at him and perceive him in particular ways?
I can't see that it does. Genuinely, can you?
I don't.
You guys.
1940s Ireland, being Irish in America in the 1940s probably means something a little bit different to how it does today.
Yeah.
It probably is a nostalgic stereotype. I guess that there's an element of it's just... does the drunken Irish stereotype exist at this point? Probably.
Yes.
As workers, as underdogs, maybe.
Well, that was referenced in the movie anyway.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think he makes a comment about intelligence as well. There's possibly the perception that being Irish meant you were a bit thick and a bit slow, and therefore, you know, you were a likely patsy because they could con you. You would just accept the stuff and wouldn't even realise.
That makes it worse. That makes it worse.
I mean, this is the thing. I have spent many years getting over this accent.
Yeah.
When I first saw it, I struggled so much that I didn't enjoy it. I couldn't not see beyond the accent. These days, I know that it sounds odd, but I just ignore it and I try and enjoy the rest of the film just for what it is.
Well, I mean, I came to it as part of some work I was doing on film noir at the time. So I first encountered it before I actually really had much to do with Orson Welles as a director. I mean, Orson Welles as a director and actor, just generally a filmmaker these days, is probably one of my favourite filmmakers of all time. I mean, I would almost certainly have forked out money to see the guy direct a stage performance of a reading of the phone book. I genuinely love everything he does. And Lady from Shanghai, there's still a lot to love about it. The accent is a major stumbling block for me because I can't buy that character. Everything he's doing there, I mean, it's a wonderfully understated performance in a lot of ways in everything except for the accent. But I can't buy that character at all.
I think we're going to have to move past the accent, otherwise we will spend
the whole episode complaining about the accent.
So this is a show produced by people from the island of Ireland who find the Irish accent they talked about Orson Welles within this film somewhat just wide off the mark.
Yeah, I think we should do a whole episode at some point about the
dodgy
Hollywood,
Irish accents.
Hollywood No, the Hollywood attitude to Irishness on screen. I think there's a lot to be said there. But anyway, I accept it. I move on.
Good. Hallelujah. You did mention film noir, however.
Yes.
I don't think we've really talked about film noir on the pod before, have we, Ben?
Maybe mentioned it in passing once or twice.
Now I'm excited.
Do you know what film noir is? Do you understand the term in any way, shape or form?
Is it that kind of sort of, I don't know, educated guess would be a particular type of movie, sort of generally involving law and police and that, crime,
effectively, yeah.
They tend to be these sort of black and white movies. I mean, it's the black and white era when the term sort of comes into its own. But it's not just black and white. It's very, very, very black, very, very white. It's I suppose actually in terms of sometimes the plots as well, it's very black and white.
Well, that's essential. I mean, it is effectively about the darkness that lives in the heart of all men, and the sort of the metaphorical darkness being turned into visual darkness. I mean, they're beautiful films. When you see what's actually being done artistically with these films, I love the sharp contrast between light and dark. That just really, really works for me visually. They have a lot of problems ideologically. They come from a really dark time in the American psyche, and they're specifically American films. The cycle arguably begins in 1941 with the Maltese Falcon. There's some arguments that it starts a year earlier than that.
The Maltese Falcon with Pierre Laurie.
The Maltese Falcon, and then it ends with Touch of Evil in 1950. Oh no, 58. 58.
You knew that one, Ben.
I do know this, and I know how long the film noir cycle is, and I can't believe I couldn't remember that. But it's
that one?
We did watch that one.
Yeah, it's brilliant, and I love that film. I love it. It's probably my favourite film noir.
But they are essentially crime dramas.
They're dark films about
often
dark
with a gangster element.
But they don't have to be, because Mildred Pierce is a family drama. But it's still a film noir.
The visual style is very influenced by German expressionism. So again, it's that what they call chiaroscuro lighting. It's again the dark black blacks, the light lights. You'll often see odd camera angles, particularly in an Orson Welles film. Orson's very good at doing stuff that looks a little bit different and more interesting.
Talking of film noir featuring Orson Welles with crazy camera angles, watch The Third Man. Watch the sequence with them running through Vienna and count the amount of times that the camera is skewed at an angle, okay? You can't do it. You literally can't do it. There aren't enough numbers in the world.
The Third Man is a film that we are going to come back to.
I love The Third Man.
You will have heard me, Ben, talking about this in one of our project ideas.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we can't say more for our listeners at this stage.
Right.
But there is a plan.
But it's a type of film that is really about looking at wickedness, and it's basically about looking at wicked women as well. So have you heard about the concept of the femme fatale, Ben?
No.
Okay. She's basically a woman who is very beautiful and knows that she's very beautiful and uses that beauty and sexuality to get what she wants. So she lures our hapless hero, who's often very flawed himself, but she lures him into a situation where he is kind of obliged to commit an act that he doesn't agree with, or he ends up in a lot of trouble. She generally ends up dead.
Can you see a parallel? Can you see why this might be regarded as a film noir yet?
No.
You can't see those elements within our film today.
Well, yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Right.
So is that the norm for
film noirs?
Yeah.
Pretty much. So it means that they're very easy to read. I mean, the thing about a lot of, I use inverted commas, is genre films.
Right.
You know, stuff.
Is film noir a genre? Another question for another day.
What the issue about a lot of genre films is that they do sort of follow these little beats. There are certain dramatic elements, little tropes that you could almost got guaranteed to happen.
Yeah.
So you can walk into there and kind of know what you're going to get by the end of the film. You know what the character development is going to be very, very roughly. Obviously, each of them takes its own little joy from the way that the plot is particularly weaved, particular actors' performances, little details like that. That's where the joy comes in them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the same way we talked. We were having a conversation earlier on about James Bond films.
Yeah.
You know, so this idea that all Bond films are the same. You kind of know what you're going to go into when you see a Bond film, but each of them is different, and they are the same, but they're also very different. And film noir, in to an extent, is the same. Same way, like certain horror films follow certain things, certain musicals follow certain things,
certain tropes.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean they're deeply misogynistic films. They're films with a clear sense of the threat that women pose all the way through. There's kind of socio-historical reasons for that. I mean, they start.
Because women are evil.
Sorry?
Because women are evil.
We actually aren't. We just want you to think that, so you'll fear us. They start during the war period when women are being urged to step into the traditionally male workspaces because the men are being called up to fight, and there is this sense, and this is all something that's identified sort of after the fact. It's not really something that anybody notices happening at the time, but there's a sense in which women are moving out of the domestic sphere and maybe emasculating the male sphere somewhat. And then once the war ends and we need to get women out of the workspace back into the home so the men can have the jobs again, the women kind of don't want to do that anymore. They've seen what it's like to have a bit of economic independence and they kind of want to stay working now.
Yeah.
So film noir comes out of that period of real deep uncertainty and real social upheaval, and it's something that the French, it's a French term obviously, but it comes from the fact that during the war, during Nazi occupation of France, American films aren't being viewed at all. So all of a sudden, liberation happens, and all these films arrive en masse. And the French have been used to seeing these lovely screwball comedies from America, maybe a bit of Western every now and again. And all of a sudden, they're watching these films, going, "Good God, America, what happened? Everything got so dark and miserable and nihilistic." And that's where they get this idea of film noir, and they are the ones to identify it as being a separate type of film. And that's where Lady from Shanghai comes in. And it's not the noiriest of noir films. I mean, it's got lots of noir. It's a bit bright, really, to be noir. It's in Acapulco.
Noir being French for black. Yeah. So I guess also, I mean, not just black, but also shadow, I think. When you think about these are films that are very much in the shadows. This film in particular, and this film is full of shadow.
It's also full of really, really bright sunlight. They spend a lot of time on a yacht.
Well, yeah.
On Errol Flynn's yacht.
Errol Flynn's yacht, yes. With his beagle. Mm-hmm. The dog that randomly turns up in Elsa's arms is Errol Flynn's dog, because it was his yacht.
What are your thoughts on sort of the visuals of this film?
It was all right. Like,
okay, let's take this a different way. Okay, mm-hmm. So I think the only exposure you've got to Orson Welles before this really was A Touch of Evil, which I don't know if you recall. It's been a few years.
Was that the one with the long shot at the start?
Yes.
That's the one, yeah.
Charlton Heston playing a Mexican.
Yeah.
And some interesting casting.
Okay, so you remember that film, and he plays the rather grotesque...
the wee town that's on the border.
That's the one, and Orson Welles plays the cop Hank Quinlan, who may or may not be good depending on your point of view.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice that you made some kind of reference to the fact that you and I have arguments about the goodness or otherwise of Hank Quinlan all the time.
So, if you take those two films as a comparison, I mean, just interested in sort of your take on it.
Well, so you mean from like a sort of cinema shot?
I mean, Rachel. I suppose the thing is that Rachel and I, we were used to doing this, and I'm always interested in, and we've seen these films so many times now. Yeah. I'm quite interested to hear what somebody who doesn't know these films so well, who doesn't have the educational brainwashing that we have, and seeing how you respond to it. Because I remember how you responded to Touch of Evil, and you seemed more positive than I was expecting.
Yeah, well, that shot at the start of Touch of Evil was like that's crazy, because that like was one take. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? To get all that lined up, and that's holy crap.
Yeah, we've worked on sets together. We know how difficult it is to get two people to do the same thing at the time. Yeah.
Everyone's timing had to be spot on for that. But in this, it seemed a bit more choppy. Mm-hmm. Like looking, if you compare that, whenever he spoilers, he gets caught, and then in the court they're about to file whether he's guilty or not, and then he takes the pills, and then does that acting and the fight scenes and all that, which were also very choppy, like and then he runs. Like you would have thought that he would have tried to do something similar, with that long shot of more of a following thing, but that just seemed very choppy. It's like, oh, I'm going to walk past here, and then she's going to come out of here, and then I'm going to run over there, and then she's going to go. It was like backwards and forwards between the two characters. I thought it would have been, he might have came up with something to.
I think this is why. I mean, so you're watching them in sort of reverse order. Touch of Evil is 58. This is 47.
So this is
this is earlier.
Earlier, right.
So his cinema is changing, and part of the reason that people talk about that Touch of Evil sequence so much is because it does feel like it's quite revolutionary, even though it's not the first time a long take has been used on screen. It has a lot of power, and its choreography is amazing.
I don't remember any longish sort of
in this one
shots in this one.
There's not really.
However, You remember the sequence at the end in the fun fair?
Yes.
There was originally a ton more footage shot of that. Now that I completely agree
you mean
with
the
you.
bit where he gets up and he's in the fun house
He's
kind
at-
of
well,
thing,
yeah.
and he's trying to get
Basically,
out?
he's going down the helter skelter, and he's
Yeah.
in the Hall of Mirrors and stuff.
Yeah.
We actually don't know what else was shot because the studio, as was its way with Orson Welles, freaked out and recut it,
Yeah.
and that footage is considered lost. So I reckon there's probably a lot more Wells in that film originally. That, and I think where you see the Wellesian directorial excess in this, I think it's definitely in that funfair sequence that we don't have anymore. It's in the decision to shoot on location in Acapulco, which is kind of not really done. You just go, sod it, we're going to Mexico.
Well, that's a very Orson Welles thing to
Very
do.
Orson Welles thing to do. Just piss away the budget. It would tend to be shot on a soundstage. I mean, you can fake Mexico in California. It's not that far away.
Yeah.
But no, Orson Welles has to take people to the location, which I think beginning to freak the studio out slightly anyway. Also, he cut Rita Hayworth's hair, which they weren't keen on. They cut it and dyed it blonde. The studio were very upset about that. Deeply upset about that.
You know the bit whenever he's up talking to George, is it?
How'd you like $5,000?
What? That's what I said. $5,000, fella.
And what do I have to do for it?
I'll fill in the details later.
Meanwhile, think it over, Michael. It's $5,000. It's yours. All you have to do is kill somebody.
Who, Mr. Grisby? I'm particular who I murdered.
And you see that shot looking over the sort of
Over the bay?
of the bay and the islands and stuff. You know, like I don't think you could have recreated that.
No, but this is one of the points that I sort of made, that even for that's quite a lot that's played in shadow. Yes,
that's true.
there is sunshine there, and you can see that it's this beautiful location.
Yeah.
But you watch the way that the light is on both George and Mike, and there is a lot of shadow on them. We're not seeing them brightly lit by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
That's
There is
a very
something-
good point, actually.
Something really menacing about every single shot in this film. Now, I mean, Wells, talking to Peter Bogdanovich about the construction of this film, does say that the bits that he was least happy with were the opening sequences in the park. Like for Wells, he just thought they were very, very pedestrian. He wasn't happy with the way the film had been scored ultimately, and not all the cutting decisions he was happy with either. But for him, that just doesn't work, and I kind of agree. That's where I struggle the most. Once they get beyond that really meet cute, it actually becomes a much more interesting film. The dynamics are more interesting. There's an awful lot there that I love.
Yeah, I do totally agree though with what Ben's saying about the courtroom scene. I mean, the only way that feels Wellesian to me is the kind of the farcical side of it. He's kind of trying to poke fun at the sort of solemnity and sort of pomp of the.
Wells is on record. He didn't like law.
Yeah.
He wasn't keen on lawyers. He wasn't keen on sort of legal processes.
Yeah, but that sequence
and he spent enough
feels
time in a courtroom
pedestrian.
himself.
Yeah, that sequence does feel pedestrian. It feels, and am I right in saying that he wasn't terribly excited about this film?
He doesn't appear to have been totally, although again, there's the problem with the mythology and him recounting it. This
After the fact of it being taken away from him, of course, at which point then he doesn't have the film that he wanted to create anyway.
So the chronology of it is a little bit confused. I was trying to dissect it this morning.
Oh, that's right. That's the story. He supposedly picks up the book. He's trying to pay a bill or something to get his stage to complete his stage show.
He's doing was it Around the World in 80 Days.
Yes.
He needs, I think,
And he's run out of cash.
$50,000 to finish
and he's
that.
going to have to close it otherwise. And he's trying to get the money from the studio. And he apparently pitches to them on the fly a book that he sees lying around. Now, given Orson Welles' record on playing fast and loose with the truth, that may well be bullshit.
It is.
Who knows? Is it? You reckon it is?
It's pretty much bullshit. Producer William Castle, who
Yeah.
is better known as the director of sort of schlocky horror films.
Serpent
in
of the Nile,
in the 50s, 60s.
magnificent film featuring a gold-painted Julie Newmar. Everybody should see it.
There we go. I didn't think you'd know who William Castle was.
He directed Serpent of the Nile. It was one of the films that I studied for my PhD. There you go.
There you go. But William Castle had apparently originally picked up the book and he'd pitched it to Wells, and they'd had a chat about it, and basically the way the conversation supposedly went was that one of them was going to produce, one of them was going to direct. Weren't quite sure which way it was going to be around. And Castle had been trying to pitch it to different studios, and the studios basically weren't basically taking it at all. And at some stage, Wells has gone in. The suspicion is after the rights had lapsed to the book, which Castle had acquired. And Wells pitches it, and he gets offered the money there and then. And he then says to William, "It's great, we're going to get to work together. You're going to be executive producer. But part of the package is that I get to write, I get to star, I get to direct, and I get to produce it." I mean, this is a whole, we've talked before about auteurs. We talk about this very regularly. This was a whole auteurial package.
Wells is a control freak as well.
So, I mean, he's going to do everything.
Yeah.
Castle wasn't particularly happy because Wells was also offered a lot more money than he was going to get.
Yeah.
But he said that he knew that regardless of what he did, it was going to be an experience working with Wells.
Yeah.
He would learn something from that experience, no matter what way it went.
I'm going to say something that I never imagined myself saying, but I actually genuinely would have loved to have seen the William Castle, Lady from Shanghai. Do you know, I mean...
There's no room for gimmicks in this. William Castle is a guy who rigged up theatre seats with buzzers when making The Tingler in order that people get electric shocks
You
to frighten them.
You say that because the current iteration of it, the one that we got, doesn't have gimmicks in it. But I actually think at its heart, there's a lot of silliness in this film.
There is.
It could work really well as a kind of a schlocky. And in fact, I think Wells taking it a bit too seriously probably isn't what the material needs.
I mean, Wells was disappointed that the thing for which this film was remembered is the final sequence in the Hall of Mirrors.
Yeah, I mean, I have taught that sequence so many times. It's your fundamental classic film noir. Look, everybody's reflected. Who is the real person? My word, metaphorical mirrors.
Is that where Bruce Lee... crap, what's the name of that one?
Enter the Dragon?
Enter the Dragon.
Oh yes, that's it's an homage. Yeah.
Quite probably.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very influential. It's been picked up on lots and lots of things ever since.
John Wick, there's a mirrors thing in that too.
Basically, anytime you see something like that, it's probably referencing or homaging that sequence in Wells.
Is that the first time that had been done?
No, I think Holes and Mirrors wasn't necessarily unique to this film.
Yeah.
But this used them in a different way, and it made it so iconic, I think, because it's quite inventive with what it does. It's quite bold with how it plays out that whole sequence.
Yeah.
I personally love that sequence. I would love to see more of that whole funhouse because it does feel like it starts to jump a little bit.
It's a bit jarring.
Wells is kind of he's drifting in and out of that space, and you can see him kind of exploring. You're kind of just wondering why he's doing what he's doing, and it feels a bit like a dream sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And whether it is a dream sequence or not, there's not enough of it there to make any kind of assumption on it.
Absolutely. You either do that and commit 100% or you don't do it.
Which Wells might well have done in his 150-minute odd cut.
There was a crazy amount of funhouse in that original cut, according to whatever.
Apparently the scripts are still available for the original version of the film. So we have some sort of record of what was intended to be there.
Yeah, but
so
you
another
can't,
extra hour of footage.
You can't capture
a
Wellesian film in a script.
So there would have been a lot more, definitely. But it is an interesting sequence. It is visually quite... I mean, you can't help but have your attention drawn to it. But again, that is not unusual. This is it. The sort of layers are very familiar, again, from the German Expressionist films of the 20s and 30s. If you look at Carol Reed, a director we've just mentioned in terms of The Third Man, he also shot a film here called Odd Man Out.
Yeah.
And there's a sequence in Odd Man Out set in the Crime Bar, which you will know.
I know that.
You know that bar?
Yeah.
And they're basically looking, and James Mason's sitting down looking at a pint of Guinness and the ships and stuff that start coming out of this pint of Guinness, and there's this sort of surreal multi-layering of images. This is not something that is uniquely Wells to have all those different layers one on top of another, but where it is how he plays with that. Mm-hmm. I mean, you, like those characters, become as disorientated in that room full of mirrors. You're looking at them, you can't work out who's who. So whenever people do eventually get shot, you're sort of trying to work out. Certainly, every time I watch it, I'm still trying to work out where is the real person and how did that happen.
Yeah.
My logical brain keeps on jutting into to everything else.
You would be foolish to fire that gun. With these mirrors, it's difficult to tell. You are aiming at me, aren't you? I'm aiming at you, lover.
Of course, killing you is killing myself. It's the same thing. But you know, I'm pretty tired of both of us.
But what I don't get is how Mike didn't get hit with a single bullet.
I don't know. He sort of staggers out of there, though, doesn't he? He's not. He doesn't look like a man who's completely
Well, I think
comfortable when he leaves.
Well, he's been drugged.
I think he's still. Well, he
drugged himself
due to his own stupid actions.
There's a lot. I think there's just a lot of the ending that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They sort of he staggers out and just assumes, well, everything's fine now because all the people that could testify to the fact that I've been framed are now dead. So, you know, I'm definitely going to go free now of this thing that I've been convicted of. That's no problem. Off I go.
What do you feel about Rita Hayworth?
I love her. She's brilliant.
She was all right. Like, to be honest,
I love this. 70 years old, Rita Hayworth, she's all right. Back in the day, we're like, whoa.
I'm not like she's a good looking
lass, eh?
She's a good looking lady. I don't know. This film just kind of annoyed me.
Okay.
To be honest, like I was watching it, and I'm like, I don't know. The acting didn't seem like genuine, you know, especially with Mike, and her as well. It's like I don't know. It's too fairy tale or something to a certain degree.
It's a good way to look at it. I think as a sort of fairy tale, it's probably not bad.
I think there is there's an interesting dynamic between the two of them. There couldn't not be.
No, so you won't be aware of their history. Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles were married.
No, I didn't know that.
So they were married for several years. At the time they made Lady From Shanghai, they had been separated for a couple of years. And working on the production. Rita apparently wanted to do it. She was one of the first names down on the cast all along.
They seem to be pretty amicable. I mean, the separation, the divorce and everything seems to have been amicable enough.
They were, as far as I'm aware, they were still in contact.
They had a child. One child?
One child?
One child, I think one child.
So they were still in contact for years and years afterwards. Like they got on okay, but it brought them back together again for a little while they produced the film. They divorced just before it went on general release. And what people tended to do, what critics have often done since then, is they've looked back on it. And they've looked back on Rita Hayworth and how her screen image was in particular, and said that this is Orson Welles taking revenge out on his ex. And that was put to Orson, and Orson just said that no, we were fine.
And I had divorced from Rita, and she came to me and said, I want to make your picture. I want you to come back with me. And Harry sent for me and said, I want you to do that with Rita, for her sake. Well, that turned it from 5 weeks to a big, super movie. And the essential plot is the plot of the book that I pointed to, which I had never read. So the theory, which has been printed 1,000 times, that this was an act of vengeance against Rita, that it was a great device which I was going to degrade her and so on, it's nonsense, because all that's in the book. She'd read the book and wanted to play this character, show she was an actress.
Yeah.
You know, I think that at times it probably was quite strained, because anyone who's going through an up and down
relationship,
and
having the film,
we've all been there, where we've been in the situations where things get strained, you know, and it's not easy, but they seem to be okay. And he argues the case that the stuff that was done, Rita was all on board with, and it was done basically because it suited the character. She couldn't be the screen image that she normally was.
No, I do genuinely think that it's probably it's a bold move, and I think it's kind of a really canny move to get rid of that iconic red hair for this. I mean, not only because femme fatales are often blonde.
You're about to say to me, this is a black and white film. How do you know her hair's red?
Because she's Rita Hayworth.
Yeah,
But-
exactly.
It looks different on camera.
Iconically, at this point, in terms of film noir, she is Gilda. You know, and Gilda has the flowing locks of auburn hair. And Gilda's a very different kind of film noir heroine.
I don't know that one can even necessarily look at it in relation to that, because those two films come so close together in terms of their production history.
But that's the role for which she's most well known. I mean, she even says it herself later in life. You know,
But
men go to bed with Gilda and wake up with me.
But that yeah, I would need to look at their actual production dates. And
Yeah, I
release
suppose
dates.
so. Yeah, I suppose
I
might
think-
be a bit close.
I think iconically, perhaps, but at that time, the things are essentially back to back. I don't think there's been enough time between the two films for that to be cemented as the iconic Rita Hayworth role.
No, I think that's probably fair enough. But
You know, she can still mould that screen image quite a bit, and this is something that's a bit different. You know, so you trim these flowing locks, you dye her hair a colour that she's never been before, and yeah, it stands out.
Is she natural
Redhead, yeah.
no, she's
No?
not. No,
Is she brown, brunette?
she's of Hispanic origin. Rita
Is
Hayworth.
that a hair colour?
She would have had black hair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know enough.
Yeah,
to
no,
know those things.
yeah, no. She serious amounts of work done to make her look more in line with conventional Hollywood ideals. Electrolysis in her hairline and all sorts of stuff. Yeah, I part of that whole sort of origin story upsets me a bit
Well,
because
she's moulded.
yeah, she's moulded and denied effectively. I mean, she was beautiful. She was objectively very. I mean, she is. And at this point, even when she's been transformed into Rita Hayworth, she's objectively very, very beautiful. But that image has been controlled to the extent that her very sort of origins are being denied and written over.
But then this is the Hollywood film industry at that
Yeah,
time as well. I mean,
that's
they
true.
did it with pretty much every actor out there. Is that they shape and mould how you're going to look. They decide on your name. They decide on who you want to be seen with.
Yeah, it's the star system.
You can only date certain people.
Really?
Oh yeah, I mean it's total and absolute control. They do similar things over in Britain later on as well. Whenever the British film industry is getting up and going, the studios will take control of what you do and how you are seen, and it still exists today. Some people are more resistant to it. There's a little bit more independence, but a lot of what you see, you know, if you think about it, if you look at it, it doesn't. You know, you can't subject it to too much scrutiny, but decisions are made regarding these people's lives. It is very, very strange. But that is how it was.
Didn't know that.
But I mean, I think she's... I actually really like her in this. She's captivating. I think it's quite bold to have her do that song, which is pretty striking when she sings on
It's
the
not her
boat.
singing, of course.
But if you hold me, don't take your arms away.
I mean, for me, Rita Hayworth is absolutely captivating in the film. I think that there's shots of her. I mean, there's a sense of her as an object of sexual gratification and objectification within the film.
Which is just what a femme fatale does.
We're basically looking at them the whole way through. All the characters in that film are looking at her the whole way through. They're all captivated in some way, shape, or form. Not only her husband, but also her husband's seedy, creepy-looking friend. You know,
What, George? Is that what you're talking
Yeah.
about? Yeah.
we see her sitting on the rocks, doing her, you know, just sunbathing. Most of that done in long shots, so it's actually not that intrusive.
See that dive?
Yeah. Oh, impossible dive. You're clearly diving off a different rock to the one that she's lying on.
It's still very voyeuristic,
Oh,
though.
completely.
The long shot. I mean, it's designed to look like we are looking at her.
At sea, yeah. But that shot where she's actually lying on the decks of the ship itself, and she's, you know, they got this the kind of rather sexy hypnotic song, and that glorious close up of her face. You know, she just fills the screen, and I suppose it's also an awareness that at the time, because people have this impression of her, because they're going to see her as much as they're going to see Orson Welles, probably more so to see her than they were to see Orson, to be fair. There's actually a payoff in the sense that you do get to see her face filling a screen. You know, like this image, 40 feet tall that you're going to see in a cinema, and just be suckered into it.
See, Orson.
Yeah.
The whole way through that movie, I just felt like he had just one expression.
Yep, that's not unfair.
One level, and there was no dynamic. Like,
I'm glad you've seen other Orson Welles films though, so you know that he's got a bit of range.
Yeah.
He's actually a magnificent actor.
Like, it was just this monotone.
I think it's the accent, but also
I'm a depressive little Irishman that has killed the man.
I don't know if you noticed as well, but a lot of the dialogue in the film is dubbed.
Yeah. Which
is also one of Orson Welles' favourite ways of working, was he would shoot a lot of the stuff mute and then he would dub it all later, because this comes from his days working in radio.
Yeah.
When you worked in radio, you had total control of the performance. But I suppose arguably, like what we're doing today, you have total control about how we sound on the mics and stuff.
Yes.
But it's exactly what he did, and why he loved that as a medium. He could control every bit of it. Whereas whenever you're filming, and you're filming on location,
well, sound is it's going to be awful.
We've all been on sets. We all know the dangers of when you're on location. You've got cars going around when they shouldn't be there. Airplanes flying overhead.
This thing, whenever the guy was playing the jumbo guitar, I was like, he's not playing that.
It's completely different, and it's completely risky, and there is no control, and you're so open to the elements, and that's not Orson Welles' way of doing things. As Rachel says earlier, he is almost like a megalomaniac. He likes his control. I think every now and then he's willing to give it to somebody else.
Plus, you got the technology wouldn't have tie mics and then booms.
That's it.
All that.
So the technology hasn't yet caught up with where we can do today. So there are limitations as well. At least it means the dialogue is uniform. You do get to hear it pretty much at the same level.
Yeah.
It's not like we go into other. Sometimes you go into a film and it's all over the place.
Yeah. There were some parts in it where just because of my sound brain works, you could tell that it was different, like overdubs being used, because the mic, whatever mic they were using,
different placements
must have been different, or the person was maybe off axis, or talking away from the mic.
That was a good example there, Ben.
Yeah, I thought of it. So you can kind of tell it's been overdubbed and that.
So it is kind of interesting in a way that even with that, and with that total control, that he doesn't have more range within the part. But I actually don't think this is really Orson Welles' film.
Yeah,
the film is not about him. It's Rita's film.
Yeah, and I think as well, the film that we have is not the film that he wanted to make. I think the bits that we have are the bits that are the most conventional. They're the most in line with what Hollywood expects you to turn out as a Hollywood director at this period. The bits that were very, very Orson Welles, probably the bits that he connected with as a filmmaker, I imagine, are the bits that didn't make it in.
The best bits.
It's just what happens to him all the way through his Hollywood career, is that, they give him so much rope. He uses that rope to hang himself spectacularly. The studio nick the film back and recut it, so that the whole reason why you hire Orson Welles is to have an Orson Welles film, and then they turn it into a Hollywood film. So yeah, I do suspect that the bits that we've got are not the bits that he was really trying to shine at, because they're the filler bits between the big set pieces that he wants to film.
Does he have any films that he had complete and utter total control?
Citizen Kane.
That the only one?
Well, there's certainly his European stuff.
So.
Oh God, Citizen Kane is one of the best films ever made, and I will fight on that hill and die there.
He is not that prolific a director, because he spends a lot of time working on films that never really get anywhere.
A lot of time trying to get money for films once Hollywood has enough with him.
As an actor, he is everywhere. As a personality, he's everywhere. But the reason he's everywhere is because he will take any job at all that pays him in order that he can make the films that he wants to make.
I think the European stuff is probably I mean, when he's making the films for very little money, they are probably closer to the kind of films that he wants to make because he has much greater creative control over them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to think in my head about his list because obviously there's this Citizen Kane, but the next one, Magnificent Ambersons, he does.
Taken off him by the studio, significant cuts made.
And it's developed an almost mythological status. I think The Trial is more or less his.
It's again European, isn't it?
It's a European film. Touch of Evil was hacked by the studios. It's not his finished film.
Although that is so very, very Wellesy, and I can't, I think the studio had nowhere to go with that, other than to let it be Wellesian. Chimes at Midnight.
Chimes at Midnight. F for Fake is.
F for Fake is so very, very, very Orson Welles.
It's very Orson Welles, but it's also partly a found footage film. It's partly made up from somebody else's documentary that he got rights to. So it's not entirely an Orson Welles film. The Other Side of the Wind, which was eventually completed only a couple of years ago, ultimately was a film that was finished by somebody else.
Yeah.
The same with his Don Quixote. It was a film that ended up being finished, a version of it by somebody else. So it's not. We don't even have an idea about how he would have cut it. I actually am not convinced that any of the films that we see of Orson Welles.
No, I think Citizen Kane. I think that was the problem with Citizen Kane, was that it was
arguably Citizen Kane, and that's it.
I mean, he did Citizen Kane. He just Orson Welles'd the hell out of Citizen Kane, and the film did not do what it was supposed to do at the box office.
So what, coming from a non-educated sort of background in the whole Orson Welles thing, what is it about Orson Welles that is so
special? I think it's probably more obvious if we sat and we watched Citizen Kane and we talked about it, because then you're seeing what he's doing for the first time, where he's doing things like he'll have shots that include.
Is that a later film or
this is his first
feature?
Film?
Yeah,
when he was 24.
So really, really young,
talented little bastard.
Massive film, but it's the way he uses lights. It's the way he changes the way that the way he uses deep focus.
He has an instinctive sense of cinema that really it caused him to innovate. It caused him to use cutting edge techniques and to make use of techniques that nobody had really understood the capacity of before. He has an instinctive sense of story as well, and a sort of a playful attitude towards moulding that story into the story he wants to tell and making it his.
Yeah.
He's got just an instinct for cinema.
I like how so much of what you like about him is this storytelling. For me, it's all about the visuals. I think that.
I also said the instinctive sense of cinema. I mean that very much so. What he does in Citizen Kane and the innovations that he introduces or popularizes, I suppose. He really understands how to use a camera.
Mm-hmm. Like his way that he positions a camera, the way that he uses the lenses, what he chooses to show and not show. So something like Touch of Evil, where he does that all in one take.
Mm-hmm. God, it's so amazing.
It's not even just the technical brilliance about that. It's about the decisions that you've made to tell that whole bit of storytelling using the camera and the point at which you decide, I'm going to cut away from this now.
Yeah.
There's a fantastic scene analysis of that, and I'm not normally one to recommend scene analyses because I just find them a good sleep aid. But there's a fantastic scene analysis, and I can't remember the academic who does it, but where they really unpack just how deeply brilliant the interaction of camera work and story and narrative is, and how seamless it all is. In a way that makes it look invisible. It's amazing.
I think for me as well, though, the other thing that I love about Orson Welles, and I suspect we probably talked about this back when we did our Touch of Evil event all those years ago, is the fact that he is a director that beats his own drum the whole way through. He is so stubborn and so resilient. I mean, he's very, very fragile too, but he crafts things and he is so determined, and he will work with nothing. For all his egomania, he's quite prepared to take the crappiest of roles and the crappiest of films in order to literally create his art. He takes that money and he creates art with it.
Yeah.
He puts himself into really difficult situations just to create something that is artistic, that is beautiful. And the fact that he's constantly up against the studio system that doesn't work for him, he begrudgingly kind of goes into it, and he tries, and just he's got too clear an idea in his own head about what he wants to do, but he's also somebody who, and this sounds egomaniac, but I identify with is that he's someone who can't quite finish, who's got this fear of the final product, because once it's finished, people start judging it, and because you always know you could have done it better. And I think he's fiercely critical of himself.
There's a damaged little boy inside him all the way through his entire career, all the way through his life. There's a damaged little boy. He's the son of a brilliant mother who was kind of elbowed into a type of domesticity that she was never really comfortable with, but she was artistically and intellectually brilliant, and she expected brilliance from both her boys. His older brother wasn't particularly brilliant, so all the focus went on to Orson, and he was expected and it was demanded of him. And she died when he was quite young, so this memory is kind of preserved inviolate in his head, and all the way through his life he has to be special, brilliant little Orson Welles. And if he's not brilliant, then he's letting his mum down. You know, this woman that he adored and sort of that he worshipped, and who had such high expectations of him. I mean, once you actually look at the patterns recurring through, now you know me, I'm not into auteur theory at all. I think there are a few directors whose work you just can't discuss without talking about that concept of the auteur, and Wells is one of them. And if you look at the things that kind of obsess him, and that attitude he has to the work, to the creativity, to the perfectionism, and that constant sort of belligerence, the pushing back, it's such a heartbroken little boy at the centre of it. It's really quite sad. I don't think he ever really found what he was looking for, just looking at the work he was doing and the attitude that he had all the way through it.
No, I don't think so. I mean, he was a man who was born into relative privilege. You know, he had wealth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he couldn't have come to Ireland as a teenager. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
But you know, he was able to do interesting stuff. He also was gifted and talented. The way that he worked with the Mercury Radio Project, the sort of productions that they're putting on, the way that he was changing that medium. It's Orson Welles that does the adaptation of War of the Worlds in the 1930s that plays on the radio, where people apparently thought it was an alien attack.
Yeah.
I mean, that is something that even if you have never seen an Orson Welles film, you're probably aware about that story.
Yeah, well, yeah, I've heard about that, yeah.
Which is, again, almost certainly an Orson Welles exaggeration.
It's a great bit of publicity.
Yeah.
It may be true to a tiny extent.
A couple of crazy people crazied, but the entire of America did not think they were under alien attack.
Well, you never know.
They probably were. But I mean, he does it on radio. He's pushing the boundaries when it comes to theatre. He's pushing the boundaries with this. But he was so confident as well, I think. No, I don't think confidence is the right word, but I think he was aware of his own abilities.
Yeah.
And I think he knew he was gifted in the arts.
He's been told since he was old enough to walk that he was gifted in the arts.
But it's a lot. With great power comes great responsibility.
With great responsibility, yes.
And I think that for him, even with that knowledge, he knew that there was a lot more to it, and it was a struggle.
Yeah.
But for me, it is that sheer. I look at his films, and even something like Lady From Shanghai, which initially to me, you know, can appear like a pretty run of the mill film, noirish film, has something else in it that sets it apart from other films of that era.
I'd have to watch a load of films from that era to sort of.
It's beautiful. It's arresting. It visually it's stunning. And for me, whilst he may have been dissatisfied with the way that the climax at the fun fair worked out, I mean, for me, it's captivating. It's interesting. Before we wrap this up, do you draw on any other parallels between this and any of our other films that we've covered so far on the series? Because, I mean, you know, I have this idea now that our films at this point are now starting to link into each other.
Well, are you talking about location?
You tell me what you've observed.
Well, where was it? They ended up San
Francisco.
San Francisco.
Sausalito and San Francisco. Sausalito's just across the bay. We've not touched on San Francisco on this show, have we?
Well, where is it? San Diego, was it? No.
Whale's vagina? No.
What?
Isn't that the Anchorman line?
Yeah.
Oh, is that right?
A whale's vagina. Yeah.
Don't make me doubt myself, Rachel. Film critic fails.
Oh, where is it you were going?
I've been to San Francisco.
Yeah, San Francisco.
Yeah, I did a live video feed last year from the site of the fairground.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Um,
So we have, over the last bunch of episodes, had a number of sort of San Francisco themed films turning up.
Yeah.
So, I mean, recently we've had I Married an Axe Murderer. We stuck one of our archive programs up about Harold and Maude. We looked at Vertigo. We have talked about San Francisco quite a bit.
Yeah.
So this is sensibly another one of those San Francisco films. And you may or may not have noticed there's a point where Rita Hayworth's character is in a car driving up a hill and comes down another one. As she's going around, she's passing by Madeline's apartment in Vertigo.
Oh.
She actually goes right outside. She does a Jimmy Stewart.
10 years before it's Madeline's apartment.
Well, we don't know how long Madeline's living there for. Madeline is probably living there at that very point in time.
Come on, she's about 12.
The actual Madeline, not the one the one that got bumped off.
Fair enough. Okay.
So I just think that's rather nice, is that you have this point where you're kind of coming back and you're looking at these same places and I don't know, it's like this weird thing where you start to imagine all these characters living in this place and overlapping and intersecting each lives.
Yes.
I don't know, I'm just interested in this idea that if we keep on coming back to a space and you can sort of see how it changes, and I do like the idea that these characters are all existing within the same place.
Yeah. Well, though you do in Lady from Shanghai, you do see a different.
Mm. Well, this is it, like Chinatown, which
Chinatown and sort of the docks.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't really get to see that side.
No, although your man works in the docks in Vertigo because we see him in the apartment and all that stuff's happening outside, but we don't really get into them.
He's an owner of a shipyard, but we don't actually see the shipyard.
Yeah. It's just an interesting observation. I've got lots of stuff I want to do about San Francisco. It's a space that I think is quite interesting. But after a while, these places start to get a resonance and they start to seem familiar. And if we're going to do San Francisco films at some point, I will have to introduce you to Dr. Goldfoot. And Bullet.
Okay, Bullet. Do you know I've never seen Bullet?
You've never seen Bullet?
Never seen Bullet.
I was taught to think about love in Chinese.
The way a Frenchman thinks about laughter in French.
The Chinese say it is difficult for love to last long. Therefore, one who loves passionately is cured of love in the end.
Well, that's a hard way of thinking.
There's more to the proverb. Human nature is eternal. Therefore, one who follows his nature keeps his original nature in the end.
Well, anyway, there we go. That was Orson Welles and Lady from Shanghai. Unless you guys have anything else you want to add to our thoughts?
No.
In unison, there we
I
go.
like it fine. It's just not my favourite Orson Welles film.
I could take it or leave it.
It's not.
That's just the one-dimensional sort of
so
acting. I don't know. It's probably too harsh, but it just kind of annoyed me.
It's how you respond to it. I mean, how you respond to a film is entirely valid.
Yeah.
We're not telling you how to feel. I'm going to like it more and more every time I watch it. Weirdly. I've seen it, I think, 3 times in the last year. And each time I've got something else out of it. So, I mean, I had never noticed the Madeline's apartment until the last viewing. So it is one of those weird things, is that the more stuff you kind of, the more you come back to something, the more you see, the more you kind of get along with it. But look, I think it's an interesting film. I think even a bad Orson Welles film is worth looking at, and there is always something you'll get out of it.
I don't think there's such thing as a bad Orson Welles film. There's just less good Orson Welles films.
There's certainly some bad Orson Welles performances, but that's a pod for another day.
Okay, that's a pod for another day.
As ever, thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank me.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks, Robert.
Oh, that was nice. Not prompted at all. You will catch us on social media. We are on Twitter and Facebook as CinePunked. You'll find us on Instagram as CinePunked Film, and our website is www.cinepunked.com. Hopefully, if this is your first time joining the podcast, you will have enjoyed it, and you might leave us a little review on iTunes or subscribe. Definitely should subscribe. We have lots more episodes out there, and we do other things as well. So have a look on our social media and our website, and you'll find out all more about the CinePunked project. Until the next time, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.